Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, there we go. So one of the first things to do at a cyber risk governance program is fix the cyber risk. So thank you for coming. Welcome to the Institute for Excellence in Corporate Governance annual conference. And we're excited to be able to present this. I have my partner, Don Springer, who is actually linked in. This is the only session that's actually being linked out live. And we have several interviews with Jamie Tassa, who's the Executive Director of the American College of Corporate Directors, and a very special guest, Leo Strine, Judge Strine, who was a former Chief Justice at the Delaware Supreme Court. And I have two pre-recorded videos that we'll play of the interviews with them, but they're streaming in live. Don, Jamie, and Judge, thank you, and others that are also streaming in. I'm going to introduce my panel in a little while, but I'd like to get started here and what would be the takeaways from our time together. Well, I would hope one of the takeaways would be we are able to lift our level of intelligence of what cyber risk governance is about, and to be able to understand what are the strategies that we can consider as professional directors that would make for effective cyber risk governance in an expanding range of cyber risk. One of the things you'll note about our time together is we're going to go beyond cybersecurity threats, and we're going to talk about data privacy, which is clearly part of cyber today. We're also going to talk about artificial intelligence. We're in the early innings, and in no way can we cover everything from a technical standpoint for cyber risk governance. We also, with Kara's help, are going to talk about cyber insurance. I would say as I started this journey in developing the SIQ cyber risk governance model that was launched out of the governance capital model work innovated by the Institute for Excellence in Corporate Governance, thank you, Mark, that it became very clear that cyber insurance, corporate insurance, was going to be as much a driver as any other influence in cyber risk governance. So the takeaway here is to together collaborate as if we were a board. I don't want to make this a one-to-many presentation. I hope we can have a collaborative discussion. And what became clear to me is the takeaways we take away from these governance events are basically what we bring to the event: an open mind, a willingness to learn. It's another way of saying what you take away from an event like this is what you take to the event. So with that, let's get started. Here's our session. We're going to talk about what is the cyber governance problem and what's the solution framework. Then we'll have a professional director interview with Jamie Tassa, who's corporate board member. She's publisher of corporate board member as well as the executive director of American College of Corporate Directors. Then we're going to talk about NIST Plus. NIST is the National Institute for Standards and Technology, and we've added a couple of more components to have 8 strategy components of NIST. We call that the Enterprise Risk Management Strategy. And then we'll have I couldn't have asked for better panelists. This is truly an all-star panel in every sense of the word, and I think you'll see why. And then we'll talk about Caremark. We are calling our board governance oversight of cyber risk the Board Caremark Plan. Board Caremark Oversight. It's governance oversight. We'll make that distinction. And then we'll have I'll play the video with Judge Strine, and then we'll talk through, just briefly, the cyber risk governance model, the SIQ cyber model, and then we'll end up with basically how do we leverage our intelligence, and what is UTD doing in terms of this program. So let's start. I want to just start best in class. This, many of you know I played in the NFL, and played around teams that were really good and teams that weren't so good. And as I started this corporate governance journey, probably a decade ago, really kind of more the closet academic in me, I've tried to step back and think about what makes best-in-class organizations. So some of what you'll see here is really learnings from what makes best in class. Well, right now we have a governance shift going on from tactical to strategic. We can say tactical is, the three primary board committees. Not everybody has a risk committee. Banks do, others do, but these are the three primary ones you're familiar with. And checklist corporate governance processes, the traditional top-down hierarchical kind of governance process. Strategic, really board and management, co-governance. It's really bottom-up meets top-down. Better put, it's bottom-up self-governance meets top-down self-governance. And you'll see a slide in just a moment that makes that a little clearer. And these three strategies that come back, organizational resiliency, competitive advantage, and stakeholder trust. Okay. Well, governance intelligence. Really, the theme that you'll hear today is being able to ask the right questions and validate the right answers. It comes up over and over and over again from panelists that I've talked to in preparation, Judge Strine, Jamie Tassa. It is the single defining characteristic of professional directors. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay, so that's our fix, our workaround. Okay, sounds good. Good. We roll with it, right? In cyber. Okay, thank you, Greg. Okay, thank you. All right. Again, governance craft. I credit my good partner, Don Springer, for really coining this term, governance craft. The right questions, the right times, the right reasons to learn what you don't fully understand and know that you need to know to govern more effectively. These three competencies show up over and over again. We could argue organizational resiliency really is defense. It's often said you win championships with defense. That, I think, is mostly right. If you look over all the championship sports teams, almost in every single case, they have great defenses. Best in class, competitive advantage, offense, and this intangible, this championship intangible, which is really trust. Again, top. Having the right people, sufficient resources, accountable processes, and a performance culture to really become best in class. And I credit UTD, Mark and Greg for really the innovation of the governance capital model, which really does tease this out and puts it into a framework. So let's find what the problem is in cyber governance. Well, it's really been thought of traditionally in technology, cybersecurity risk. But it's involved and rapidly evolving. I mean, MGM is just the most recent, and the government has been hit. I mean, and cyber was part of the warfare that we're seeing between Russia and the Ukraine, and we're seeing it in China and elsewhere. Again, this is such a rapidly evolving, and most directors, particularly of a certain vintage, okay, we'll call maturity, really haven't had deep technical backgrounds with the technology that's just moving at light speed. And then we have the vulnerabilities, Internet of Things for sure, the connected universe that we live in. We're going to see this with the EV vehicles too. Connected cars are going to have the same issue in cyber, virtually everything that is connected. The cyber risk now is clearly part of expanded to include covered data with data privacy. It's one thing to keep the data secure. It's another thing to what you can use the data, both collection and use of it. Okay. So that's working? Yes. Okay. Great. So should I keep this up? Should I keep this up here? Or? Okay. Yes, I think everybody can hear me,
Can
right?
you hear him?
Can y'all hear him?
Raise your mic up, Red. There you go.
All right. That's better? Okay, excellent. Thank you, Ro. All right. And so now we have artificial intelligence. You can classify whatever kind of risk. I see that as much a data science risk. There is also legal and compliance, for sure, with artificial intelligence. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then the compliance, regulation. Most of us know about the new SEC rules for cybersecurity disclosures. In fact, MGM is going through that right now. Interesting that they reported, but it was very opaque. It's unclear. You know, there's a big debate, as my panelists know, about disclosing too much too soon that you don't know about that may cause unintended consequences. This is going to be a material issue in compliance. And now artificial intelligence, there's a bill in the Senate to regulate artificial intelligence. It will be included because of its overlap with data privacy and the GDPR standards that are being adopted. Even Texas is adopting GDPR-like standards starting next year. Cyber insurance. How many board meetings do you really have about corporate insurance? In the risk committee, I know I was on a risk committee in a public company, once a year maybe, but not really deeply to understand what's really there. And the related D&O coverage. It's not just cyber coverage themselves, related D&O coverage. And then there's this idea of have cyber expertise on the board, but what kind of expertise? And we'll talk about this in the NIST standard because the new 2.0 framework that includes govern, it leaves it open as to what that means at the operational level, governance, or at the board level, or both. So here's a framework we can think about. Effective board governance, oversight of enterprise risk management, increased intelligence, particularly with more governance capital, internal resources being leveraged by third-party experts. This will be something that we absolutely do need. Board management alignment. We'll start with this when we get to the cyber risk governance model, the foundational pyramid, this organizational resiliency pyramid that really sets a foundation. I can't tell you how many board meetings I'm in which we talk right past one another, even at the board level. The common vocabulary is so often overlooked as the essential to just start. And between management, talking technical, as well as boards, man, there just is a disconnect in so many ways. Having this mapped, cyber risk governance is but part of overall enterprise risk management, which is a part of organizational resilience, championship defense. And then basically, I'll call it 0 day, 0 trust, risk awareness. So let's talk about the risks we're going to talk about. Cybersecurity, internal and external, data privacy, really the GDPR-like standards, emerging technology. Now, artificial intelligence can certainly exacerbate external, and we're seeing that with phishing attempts and other things. We're in the early dawn of how bad guys are going to use, mostly bad guys are going to use artificial intelligence to exacerbate the cyber risks that companies have. Here, we're talking only about the internal use, misuse of artificial intelligence. There's legal aspects of that. There's over-reliance aspects. We've had, the hallucination, as they call it, with the ChatGPT and Bard and others giving back, just nonsense. And we'll have to deal with that. And then cyber insurance. We could say inadequacy, cyber insurance inadequacy. So let me pause here and play a professional director interview with Jamie Tassa. I'm so pleased to introduce Jamie Tassa to our members who are at the annual conference at the cyber session. I've gotten to know Jamie really well over the last couple of years, and I can't tell you how much I respect her and the work that she's doing in corporate governance. Jamie is the publisher of Corporate Board Member and also the Executive Director of the American College of Corporate Directors. Jamie, welcome.
Thank you so much. Truly honored to be here and be part of this event.
We're glad to have you. Jamie, tell us a little bit about the American College of Corporate Directors and also the Corporate Board Member Network.
Definitely. So Corporate Board Member serves the community of public company directors and general counsels. And under that umbrella, we have Corporate Board Member Network, which is a community of corporate directors dedicated.
I'm so sorry why that is not coming on. I'm so pleased to introduce Jamie Tassa to our members who are apologies, folks. Not sure why the video is not coming on. Do I have to click out of the PowerPoint? Okay. I'm so pleased to introduce Jamie Tassa to our members who are at the annual conference at the cyber session. I've gotten to know Jamie really well over the last couple of years, and I can't tell you how much I respect her and the work that she's doing in corporate governance. Jamie is the publisher of Corporate Board Member and also the Executive Director of the American College of Corporate Directors. Jamie, welcome.
Thank you so much. Truly honored to be here and be part of this event.
We're glad to have you. Jamie, tell us a little bit about the American College of Corporate Directors and also the Corporate Board Member Network.
Definitely. So Corporate Board Member serves the community of public company directors and general counsels. And under that umbrella, we have Corporate Board Member Network, which is a community of corporate directors dedicated to peer-to-peer learning and continuing education. And we were so pleased to join forces with the American College of Corporate Directors a couple years ago, just with the common mission and history of providing independent thinking and governance education to individuals who have a shared passion for business and serving their organizations and serving their full stakeholder community. So ACCD is the professional director credentialing arm of Corporate Board Member, and we host events throughout the year, and directors can earn credits towards their professional director credential through the American College of Corporate Directors.
Thank you. And for the interest of full disclosure, I am a member of the American College of Corporate Directors, and actually I've worked on the Advisory Council and Executive Masters Professional Director, and I can personally vouch for the value of the community that the ACCD provides.
I think, and I'll interject with that I think is one thing that makes it really unique, is it is director driven. So we like to say we're the voice of the director, and so that's really where it becomes independent, is having directors lead the conversations and really, tell us their top concerns and where they need that help. And so having advisors like Brad really helps make sure that we're focusing on the right things for our members.
Well, I'm so grateful that the culture of the American College of Corporate Directors and the Institute for Excellence in Corporate Governance is very similar, very much to what's best-in-class governance. So Jamie, let's talk about best-in-class corporate governance. You've been around a lot of professional directors and boards in the big leagues, and could you tell us, when you think about best-in-class governance, both at the individual professional director level and at the board level, how should we think about it, and what are some of the insights that you've gained over the years
from being around some just great professionals and great boards?
Yeah, so I think obviously to get a seat on a board, you have to be an experienced business person with strong financial and business acumen. But you can put 10 really smart people in a room and accomplish nothing, right? So what I think makes a really good director based on the interactions I've had over the last 2 decades is someone who has really good listening skills. They know what to listen for. They know how to ask good, strong questions that will peel back the onion, that will go a layer deeper, and just that level of inquisitiveness, kind of like the 3-year-old child or grandchild who never stops asking questions. I think it's someone who has an intellectual curiosity to just continuously be learning, and especially in an environment now where things change so quickly and there's new risks and there's new opportunities every day. If we stop learning, then we're kind of dead in our steps. And so I think that to me is what sets apart just an average director from a really strong director who can really contribute to strategic discussions in the boardroom.
Thanks. So let's talk about the boards collectively. When you think about best-in-class boards, and you've actually, as I recall, corporate board member honors boards and has boards of the year, and over the years, tell us a little bit about what you have observed in the boards that seem to be that best-in-class standard.
Definitely. So I think board dynamics is so important. I think that there's the ability to particularly as boards become, we have more diverse perspectives in the boardrooms now, the ability to, avoid unintended biases, the ability to both give and take constructive feedback, the ability to, the humility to know that, you don't have to be right every time, that you can really have some really good, strong, opinionated conversations, but respectfully, just creating a healthy board dynamics. And I think being willing to make her, takes courage to be a board member today. I think, we've honored the last couple of years for our courage in the boardroom. We've honored Microsoft and Marriott and others that just were required to make bold decisions, and Dick's Sporting Goods, just example after example where they really do understand that they're there to represent the stakeholders, and not just the shareholders but the community and the employees and all stakeholders, and to just do that in a constructive way, working together with different personalities to get to the right conclusion, and support management to the whole nose in, fingers out,
Yep.
to know the role of the board, to know where the board's role is oversight and management's role is management, and really being able to walk that fine line and be the support that management needs to make tough strategic decisions.
Excellent insights, Jamie. Let's transition to cyber risk governance. All the directors here are here. This area is exploding. It's just rapidly expanding, and our board members are having a difficult time really wrapping their arms around, both individually and as boards. Tell us, give us some guidance as to how we might want to think about effective cyber risk governance.
Yeah, so in our annual What Directors Think study that corporate board member publishes with Diligent Institute, cyber security and data privacy is consistently the #1 issue that directors tell us is the hardest thing to oversee. And it is, it's moving so fast, and no company is immune to it. It's really not a matter of if, it's when. Something of some degree is going to happen. But I think that, you think about cybersecurity as a risk. Risk is inevitable. And all risks aren't negative. They're risks with upside. And I think, when you think about cybersecurity in the broader ERM picture, it's, placing risks into categories based on their potential impact, 1, 2, 3 level, prioritizing the risks that are, more likely to happen and if they do, going to have a bigger impact, and then, developing a strategy around that. So, when it comes to cyber risk specifically, really being educated enough to not be a cyber expert, but to know what questions to ask of the expert, to know that the CEO has put the right people in place on the management team to protect the company, and to know, what information does the board need from those folks, what are the smart questions that they should be asking. And that's what it is. You don't have to be the cyber expert, but you do have to know how to ask the smart questions in the boardroom.
Great advice. And I think that fits with the theme that we have here at the cyber session, which is being able to ask the right questions and validate the right answers. To me, I think that exemplifies what best-in-class governance is all about, both at an individual director level and at the board level. So, Jamie, thank you. I would like to announce that and thank Greg Ballou, who's Executive Director at the Institute for Excellence in Corporate Governance. So anybody who wants to join the American College of Corporate Directors, the requirement of 15 hours for the Professional Director Certificate, 3 of those hours will be filled by those who attended today's session. And we'll work with Roe at the American College with Institute for Excellence in Corporate Governance, and we'll be able to make the arrangements so that you get credit for the 3 hours here if you decide to join the ACCD. Jamie, any other guidance you'd like to give our director group today?
Yeah, no, I just want to commend everyone who is at the event. This is how you learn what those smart questions are to ask, by attending events like this one, by reading content and surrounding yourself with other directors for peer-to-peer learning. And so, kudos to all of you, and happy to answer, any questions folks have about the ACCD and the professional director credentials, and Ro can provide my contact information. And we will look forward to more things to come with the Institute on this educational front. It fits nicely within the scope of, supporting the board community, and this area of cyber is definitely one we know directors are eager for help. So thank you for your leadership on it.
Jamie, on behalf of the Institute for Excellence in Corporate Governance, we all express our appreciation to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Okay, we're still on. Let's see if I can't get us back to where we left off. Okay. All right. Thank you for being patient for a couple of technical difficulties. They always seem to come up in the presentations, right? Thank you, Jamie, thank you very much. NIST Cyber Risk Money, we call it NIST Plus. So let's talk a little bit about what NIST Plus is. And again, think of today as NIST Plus meets Caremark governance oversight. NIST had started with 5 kind of components of NIST. In 2.0, they added another one, govern. But identify, protect, comply, we added comply. So originally comply was probably embedded in one of the others. But we've expressed, because when you hear Judge Strine talk about legal and compliance as one of the primary governance oversight, this really needs to be teased out because compliance is going to be across the board in all of the cyber risk governance. Detect, insure, we've added insure explicitly. It was probably, you could argue, in recover or detect, but really insure, I think, needs to be teased out. Respond, recover, and new govern. Well, we've talked about what are some of the questions that a board should be asking when it comes to the NIST Plus? Well, here are some of the questions. You know, how does a company have and this is the heart and soul of the starting point for Caremark, which is an identification system. Caremark uses different words than perhaps the vernacular of the corporate governance community, but really, how do you detect? How do you have something proactively in place where you're constantly looking for these zero-day risk in particular? And what ERM practices should the board put in place to make sure that a company is protected? Compliance. You'll hear this over and over again. And detect. What should the board do? What is governance oversight over detection? Does it mean perfection? Zero-day risk by itself means you have 0 days to prepare for a risk that is there that you don't even know about. Insure. What role does the board play in making sure that the cyber risk of cyber insurance inadequacy does not occur? How do you, what should the board's role be in a response? We're finding this in real time in ransomware attacks. So what should the board do? Is it really the management? What about outsiders that come in and try to help negotiate ransomware? Eric will talk to us a little bit about that because that was his job really with the FBI. Recover. How does the board make sure that a company can recover from any array of these? Think of the reputational risk from misusing artificial intelligence. It is going to occur. And govern. What is this idea of governance? And so I'd like to invite my panel to come up. And while they come up, I'm going to introduce them. Kara is coming up. Okay, sure. Just come up, and we have 2 live mics. I'll sit right here. Kara is Senior Vice President with Griff Williams and Seibel, and with Executive Risk Group. Jessica Nemmers is longtime CEO and was a professional ballerina at SNU, and is the field CISO for Flare Data Systems. My good friend Eric Jackson was the former FBI special agent in charge of the Dallas office, and most recently was Silicon Valley, running an array of risk. And Shardul Desai from Holland Knight. Holland Knight is one of the sponsors of the IECG. Shardul just flew in. He was at hosting a PLI conference in New York City yesterday and graciously flew out today and just were able to catch an Uber in just a few minutes before we started. This panel is unbelievable. And I think that I couldn't have asked for a better panel. And I think you'll agree. You've seen their bios, Jamie, and then of course we have Judge Strine. I want to come back to our, start with this. And I want to ask my panelists, and they'll share the mics together. This idea of govern, let's start with govern, if we will. Who would like to start first with idea of govern? This is the new 2.0 framework, added the govern without saying exactly what it might be. And I'm going to let Jessica lead off with this because she's really a CISO expert here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Brad. I'm excited to see this as NIST. I think this is the time we've been stepping into this, but we've also been struggling. So I've been a Chief Information Security Officer, I've been a Chief Security Officer, seen it and experienced it from both sides. And it took a few years of stumbling to start to see the difference between deer in the headlight of board members when I came in to give a cyber presentation, and then light bulbs going over their heads when I was giving the cyber presentation. So I think and again, this is just in my humble opinion, but the intent of the addition to NIST is to get a common language going about cyber risk and about identifying it, quantifying it, qualifying it, and then really talking about the risk appetite for the organization. I think a lot of times boards think that every risk has to be equally as threatening and equally as high, and that's not the case. And it really does depend not only on the industry, but your particular company and how it's structured. So I think that's, as we start to look into this, it's not quite as prescriptive as maybe we would hope, but it does provide a framework and some guardrails for us to begin these conversations.
Thank you, Jessica. Chardell, you and I talked a little bit about this. Give us some of your thoughts.
Yeah, I think we got to take a look at what's going on in the environment first, right? We've seen just a rapid increase in cyber attacks, and the way these attacks have changed over the last decade, especially in the ransomware, shutting down business operations, and companies just being unprepared for that at the time that was happening, has really shifted regulators' focus and shifted everyone's focus on what does the management team really know? What does the board really know about these risks? And we've seen some of this change happen in the regulator space. The chief security officer at Uber tried to hide a cyber incident, pretty egregious conduct, and was charged with a criminal case. And then we've seen just recently the SEC send a Wells notice to the executives of SolarWind related to the SolarWind incident. And so what we're seeing here is a shift of both the regulator, but in the industry as a whole, that this really needs to be focused more at the management level, at the board level. And so what the SEC is coming out with its cybersecurity rule for public companies, the NIST 2.0 framework was very timely in giving some guidance to companies. But the NIST framework is really helping to help standardize and set some benchmarking goals for companies in order for them to assess how to do governance, right? No one wants to be operating in the blind, and when the SEC and the regulators say we want governance programs, it is helpful to have NIST to provide some standardization of what companies should be thinking through in that process. And we all recognize that having NIST compliance doesn't mean you're going to avoid having a cybersecurity incident. It doesn't guarantee anything, but what it's doing is getting you to start thinking through that problem in a more meaningful way. Right? Today, there's no longer a culture of, I don't know what I don't know, right? And the boards can't work in that world. And so what they need help in is how to think through the problem. And I think that's where the NIST cybersecurity framework, the govern components, really helps them, looking at what kind of internal processes they need to put in place to start assessing how they want to incorporate cybersecurity risk into their overall enterprise risk management program. But really, cybersecurity risk needs to be looked at as a global, holistic risk approach to the company. And these policies and procedures help us get around what is generally what I consider the two major challenges in cybersecurity risk assessment for companies. One, we have a natural inhibition to think through or get around the fact that this is a technical issue, right? We all think it's technical. It is technically complicated, but it isn't a technical issue. It's a corporate issue. It's an enterprise issue. And then the second issue really on the cybersecurity side is the evolving nature of the threat. And so really having policies in place that are kind of a standard that allows us to understand that we need to be looking at this as an evolving constant threat. You could put in a security program or a program in place in the cyberspace, but it could become obsolete in 2 years. That's not necessarily true of other organizational enterprise risks, right? And that's why I think the NIST cybersecurity framework with the govern component is really helpful, because again, it's not overly prescriptive of telling you exactly what you need to be doing, but it gives you that framework to work on standardizing, making sure you have a benchmark to look at, to then set into a way of reviewing and assessing these threats as it's constantly evolving. And I'm sure we're going to talk more about those evolving threats, and I know, Eric, you've seen a lot of that at the FBI, but I think that's what the NIST cybersecurity govern component really helps us with today.
Thanks. So I'm going to let Eric weigh in, then I want to close out this part of our questions with Kara's unique perspective. Eric, you most recently were with Silicon Valley, and actually both with your law enforcement background with the FBI, as well as what you've done both here with TKB Bank as well as Silicon Valley. You see it, and you had a span of influence within Silicon Valley to try to bring together and address this idea of governance. Could you maybe tell us your thoughts on what governance is when it comes to enterprise risk management?
Well, I think the first thing that I always look at when I think of governance is what is the greatest risk to a corporation? And it's its people. Because you can have a false sense of security that you have the best software package that will protect the organization, and everybody takes their eye off the ball. That's the most important risk, is your people. And it gives boards sometime a sense of comfort because they receive a great presentation of all of the incredible software packages that have been implemented and the millions of dollars in cost. And everybody sits back and says, wow, we're protected. And when I sit as the chief security officer, the first thing I think of is you're not. Because I look at the people who are implementing those software packages. And I listen to the discussions that are happening around those software packages. And people who are saying, by using this cloud software, we've protected ourselves. Whenever I hear that, I cringe. Because as the presentation before this said, you have to always be thinking every minute what's new, what's going to change. And in governance, if you're not looking at risk years ahead, you're already behind. And that's why it's so important for boards. I've sat in board presentations, and I've heard the CISO provide a great presentation of where we are. And I've heard the chief risk officer come in and not talk about cyber at all, but just assume that the CISO has taken care of every discussion about risk. And that's what concerns me, and I've talked to Brad about it, is in governance risk, you have to be willing to ask the hard, difficult, uncomfortable, and sometimes challenging questions of everybody along the line. Every software package, every application that you think about, who's telling you what the vulnerabilities are in that application? Who's even looking for the vulnerabilities of that application on a daily basis? That's your intelligence component. And you have to be willing to say the hard, uncomfortable things at that moment. And I had a unique experience. I came to work one day when I was up at FBI headquarters, and my boss came in and said, hey, Sony just called us and they have no control of anything. What are we going to do? That's where intelligence comes in, because 10 to 12 cybersecurity companies said it wasn't the North Koreans. So we had to prove that it was the North Koreans. How do we prove it? We're already looking. We're way ahead. And if companies don't take that standard of that your employees are your risk and everything else is an additional risk. And I love what NIST has done to add governance because it's now starting to ask those questions. And don't be afraid of the answers. They may be uncomfortable, they may be challenging, but as board members, if you don't learn how to ask the right questions at the right time, expecting, I always say a Scooby-Doo answer, ooh, if you don't get that answer, then that should raise the hair on the back of your neck.
Thank you. Carrie, you have a unique perspective on this idea of cyber risk, and give us your thoughts.
Yeah, so in my role as an insurance broker before, it was interesting how rarely we interact with boards about cyber insurance. They have lots and lots of questions about D&O insurance. And so a lot of those interactions are relatively robust. It is a rare board that actually talks about cyber. And it's interesting, and when they do, we typically have two discussions. One is, do I have it? Check the box, I'm done talking about it. Or two, there's a lot of discussions I've had lately, the few that do want to talk about it, with this idea of, oh, well, we don't really have that risk. And one of the things I've noticed is boards are struggling to grapple with two concepts about what the risk is. One, you alluded to, this idea of, I outsource that to the cloud. It's not my risk anymore. It's someone else's risk. So there's a lot of misperception about that. And as a lawyer, I'm like, oh, you can outsource anything you want, but you can never outsource the actual legal responsibility for anything. So just as a reminder for that. The other is a lot of boards are grappling to, and to kind of build on what Shardul said, to understand the evolution of the risk. So I still have a lot of board members who will make the comment about, but we don't have personally identifiable information. We don't have credit cards. Thus, cyber's not at this level. And I remind them, that's not what cyber insurance is for anymore. That's like 7 things down. This is a business interruption question at this point. And so a lot of companies are still struggling to kind of make that shift to seeing it as a business interruption risk. And if you talk about that at a board level, of course a major business interruption is a strategic risk.
Yeah. Thank you. So let's talk about how to identify the identification of cyber risk itself. How should a board work with management to come up with a holistic, comprehensive risk that they're going to really focus on, that you can ask the right questions about? It strikes me that for NIST, one of the great things about NIST is you can map questions that you should be asking. Before you even get to board oversight, just enterprise risk management question. I call these the fundamentals. Before you get to governance of NIST, you need to ask the right questions about NIST and make sure that everybody's on the same page. So let's talk about the identification, starting with that fundamental where board and management have to come together and have a common vocabulary and common meeting. All right, Jessica?
Okay, so when I was driving here this morning, getting ready for this, I thought about the fact that I am never short on stories about the latest cyber attack. So we talked about MGM, right? It's like they feed it to me right before I hit the stage. So let's talk about Clorox, right? So we are not going to have Clorox wipes, or we will, but they're going to be more expensive. So think about what is happening in that boardroom right now. What questions are they asking that they probably didn't ask before, and they probably never dreamed that they would be shutting off part of their production lines to try to contain this incident, and they're still dealing with it, and they're most likely going to be delayed on their quarterly earnings because they will not be able to immediately get the impact, the financial impact of this. So I think looking from an enterprise risk perspective, if it were a cyber-related incident, what would take down our business? And again, for some companies, it would be like Garmin taking down the website. But for a manufacturing company, it would be getting into our OT area, so we cannot produce, and it could even be an employee safety problem on the floor if certain areas can't shut down properly. So it's really, that's usually where I start, is what are our business goals from the highest level, and then really looking at what area of our business would take us out first.
Yeah, brilliant. And it strikes me, when we get to Judge Strine's comments, he will echo the same thing, which is starting with a fundamental understanding of business interruption,
Yes.
which then comes right back to the insurance and then comes right back to the common vocabulary, and thinking deeper and asking the right questions. Eric, we're going to go to you next, and I'm going to come back to Kara.
Yeah, I believe in the term resiliency, and that is a term that is not being used in many corporations, is how resilient are you? And you should create a mapping, a strategic plan that tiers your resiliency. And what I mean by that is your business may have different areas of responsibility, but if one goes down, it may take the whole corporation down because of reputation. That's where resiliency is so important to understand. If this goes down, what does it take to get it back functioning, and what is the time frame? One of the things in the banking industry that we look at is our customers are so important to us. If a customer's credit card doesn't work, what do they start doing? They start immediately calling, saying, my credit card's not working, I can't spend money, and then that snowballs, and then all of a sudden it ends up on the news that Wells Fargo credit card doesn't work worldwide. Why? You have to have a resilient plan to address that. And I think some of the times what I fear is business as usual is acceptable. But being resilient and being able to quickly pivot is what a lot of companies struggle with. In my past, one of the things that I implemented was a tiering system, Tier 1 to Tier 4, identifying what applications, if they went down today, which ones will take the business down? Which ones will do reputational harm? Which ones will be the hardest to get up? Which one do we have a third-party company that's responsible that doesn't answer the phone when we call them? You know, how do we put resiliency in place? And I think that is, I would love to see more companies have a department just creating to address resiliency. And I think that is what ties right into the NIST framework, is how quickly can you pivot when an incident happens. And I think right now the corporate world is struggling with that.
Yeah. Come back to Kara on the insurance, because it strikes me, Kara, that this identification of risk is at the heart of insurance coverage. What are we going to cover, and what exclusions? Could you maybe tell us a little bit from your perspective, what are you seeing in terms of exclusions that are now coming up based off of this idea of fundamentally we're going to cover X risk, but we're not going to cover other risks? Maybe just give us your perspective.
Okay, and I was going to add a couple of comments on some of the things that Eric said in a minute, but to answer that question, how many of you have companies where you have any visibility into the placement of cyber insurance in the last couple of years? It was terrible, right? I mean, absolutely terrible. So we were looking at a situation of the market. There was a question a year and a half ago whether the cyber insurance market was going to collapse. What's interesting is made it out to the other side because of new capacity in that market, but the coverage didn't go away. So it remains a really robust product. So to answer your question, there's not a ton of exclusions that have come about in the last couple of years, except for one that is very important, and it was alluded to in one of your earlier slides about this
concept of the war exclusion. So in every insurance policy you have, there is a war exclusion that basically says, whether it's your property policy or anything, that says something to the effect of, the insurance company is not responsible for the losses of war, right? And that original exclusion as drafted, I believe, goes back to the Spanish-American War. So it was very old and not particularly applicable with regard to modern warfare. In fact, a lot of it's like boots on the ground is how a lot of that had been interpreted. So the industry is trying to figure out, what is that new exclusion going to look like? Because if we have some sort of, massive cyber attack by a foreign power, it's probably not a private enterprise that needs to be the one bearing the risk for the entire American economy for that. So they're trying to determine what that looks like. What's coming out of Lloyd's of London is there's some exclusions coming out of that are not particularly good. They haven't necessarily enforced them in all policies yet, in part because there is new capacity in the cyber market and new people want to be in there, so there are other options. And what we're starting to see is a lot of re-domestication of cyber insurance into the US to avoid that. There are some draft exclusions, but I think the thing to watch out the most for is this concept of whether that exclusion includes language about appropriation and who gets to make the decision about where the threat actor was or whether it was a government actor. I think we all in our guts know that it's pretty well always a government actor in some sense of the word. I mean, in China, it's hard to argue that anyone in the entire country is not technically a government actor, just by the way governments are set up. So if it comes down to if a government actor is involved, then it's excluded. Well, that basically eviscerates all of cyber insurance. There's too much money to be made in that industry for them to eviscerate it altogether. So it's a really long way of answering. That's the exclusion I worry about right now. Most of the other ones I don't.
Yeah, you had some add-on comments for Eric, and then I'm going to come to Chardot because he has some specific on this.
I may have already forgotten what my add-on comments were. I
We'll come back.
apologize. I'm sure they'll come up again at somewhere in this conversation.
We're going to continue to have a robust conversation. So Chardot.
I remember what it was. That notion of the resiliency concept. For my smaller clients who do not have large risk departments, the insurance policy itself is often a very significant part of that resiliency. Like, how do you pay for that moment when the whole system goes down or getting it back up?
So Chardot, you have interesting background, both the technical side and the legal side, and then you were justice, and give us some of your thoughts based off of what we've heard.
Yeah, I look at identifying cyber risk, I think, is the most challenging part of governance or of any part of cybersecurity because of its evolving nature. And I agree completely with what my colleagues here have said, which is the first and most important thing is understanding your business. That is critical to know what could happen in a cyber attack, how could your business go down, what aspects of it could change. The other side is understanding the evolving nature of the cyber threat. And this is where I think there's a lot of challenge because it's constantly evolving very quickly. When we talk about business email compromise, wire fraud scam, which is where someone gets into an email account, they send out a message changing the vendor's the payroll, how they get paid, the banking information. And we've always told people, you need to pick up the phone and call. Well, now the criminals are using deepfake to mimic the voice and behavior of the person to call and say, yes, I want you to change the account number, right? That's happening in the last year. We're seeing that increase. We're also seeing it with MFA. Everyone's been saying MFA is the standard, and it still is the predominant standard, right? You want to have multi-factor authentication, which is two types of authentication. You got your passcode, and then you have potentially most people get a message on their phone, and they enter in a code. We've seen criminals use SIM swapping, essentially tricking the mobile carriers with their SIM, getting the SIM of your number, and then getting that code and using it to get into your MFA. Alternatively, we've seen what we call MFA fatigue, where they consistently bombard someone with requests to get access into the system, and the person finally just gives up and hits okay, right? So the cyber criminals are constantly evolving their threats and the ways that, what we call TTP, right? Tactics, techniques, procedures, in getting into your system. And so understanding, obviously, the business risk, understanding your business inside and out, where you hold data, where you have critical systems, is absolutely important, and hand in hand with understanding how the criminals are changing their behavior to get into your network is the other side to that. And then last is the legal risks, right? We have tremendous increase in legal risk. In the last 4 years, we've seen over a dozen new cyber notification laws get issued, regulations out there. We've seen increases in regulations requiring cybersecurity programs in detailed ways. The increase in data breach litigation has skyrocketed. We've gone through this summer with what we call the MOVE IT incident. It's a third-party vendor program. It's a secure file transfer program. There was a 0-day vulnerability that the criminals found, which means it was an unknown vulnerability in this program. The criminals searched IP addresses for anyone who had that system running. They broke in, and we now know there's over 600 companies impacted, over 40 million people worldwide. No one could really prepare for such an incident, and yet we have over 150 class action litigations as of last week filed on this matter. And so understanding the legal risk as well, I think, is critical to understanding the various risks in identifying your understanding and identifying the cyber risks that you're facing as a company.
So let's talk about artificial intelligence, will we? We brought it up about how it's, cloning of voices and anything, pictures, and this is going to continue to be. So let's just talk about artificial intelligence. When you think about artificial intelligence and cyber risk, I'm going to leave this open-ended question. What do you think about? How should boards think about cyber risk and cyber risk governance and artificial intelligence? Compound question. Jessica, you look like you want to answer.
So I recently wrote an article about this, and I said it's like lassoing water right now. That's kind of how it feels.
Lassoing water.
Lassoing water. Good luck on that one. Yeah, I think it's going to be, there's a lot of naysayers out there that say there's no way this is going to be regulated, but this is absolutely the time. It's never going to be this simple ever again. It's about to explode. So from a governance perspective, again, for an organization, it's really beginning to start talking about it, A, and then B, starting to put some policies around it. How your organization is expected to act with AI. For example, we had some folks using ChatGPT for different inquiries and things like that. Well, it didn't occur to them that they should not ask ChatGPT with information about the company. Because now you've divulged information to an artificial intelligence provider to give you information back. So we begin to put guardrails around that. Yes, you're allowed to use ChatGPT, but you're not allowed to allude to anything. Our domain, our IP address, any technical information, any projects coming up, anything about our company that has not been deemed public. So that's one area. We've seen on the cyber side, to create a phishing email, you no longer need to worry about the fact you're not a native English speaker. AI is helping craft some very realistic emails now, where typically we were able to pick out those things like this is phishing or spam because it's just not written by a native English speaker. That's, again, it's getting harder to detect. The more they're using it, it's going to be harder for our email security to detect it as well. So then I'm going to go back to your lowest common denominator and your greatest risk, your people. So this is where, also with AI, we've got to get out there with education. Because it's cool and it's very helpful, and I love technology. So I've been in the IT space almost 30 years, but if it's not governed, it's very dangerous.
Yeah. Mr. O'Donnell, tell us a little bit about what you're seeing with your clients and in the world of Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I mean, AI is revolutionary, right? It's going to completely change the way we do business, but also how we do business. And exactly what Jessica said, right? One of the most significant risks is the IP risk. This fact that people don't realize they're giving away their IP, their trade secret, by using AI systems. The other side that we focus on, and this is where the law is most often being talked about and being developed, is the bias. AI is only as good as the input that it's fed into it, that system, right? And so there's input bias naturally. The more data it has, obviously the better in order to avoid that. But what we're seeing is there's substantial biases in the system, and the output then is obviously premised on what is put in that system. And I kind of look at this, and I analogized this before with you, Brad, which it's kind of like a horse with blinders, right? It's the horse is looking forward and can move forward, and with AI, companies can readily do that, but you're not seeing anything on the peripheral. If it's not put in the input of that AI system, it's not taken into account. And so I think that's where we see a lot of issues, and that's why when you talk about the federal regulation that's being discussed, one of the biggest concerns is bias, and impact assessment is what they're looking at. A lot of states, on their efforts on regulating AI, have been focused on hiring practices, using AI for hiring, but without realizing they're actually having discriminatory hiring practices by accident. And that's going the same way with lending. We're seeing that as well. The other side to AI, which I think is often not talked about, we hear a lot about it, it's going to replace workforce. I think the other side is we have a tendency that it's going to end up making us over-reliant on AI. You know, AI needs to be a tool for companies, but it can't be the end-all be-all for companies, right? It's one of the tools of a Swiss Army knife. And I think, you know, we are in danger of seeing people becoming over-reliant. And we've heard stories already, right, where companies have gone to interviews and the candidates all say the same thing, and then you ask the question in ChatGPT, and it's pretty much the same answer, right? And so we're already seeing this next generation using it very much in that way of being relying on ChatGPT or AI to give them the answer instead of us using it as a tool and as one part of that toolkit to get us to an answer.
Thanks. Eric? And then I'd like Kara to close us out.
I always go back to everything in my life, I think, as an FBI agent. And my wife hates it because she's like, when are you going to turn that dial off? With AI, here are the things that I would ask companies. First, is AI already in your environment? You know, that's a question to ask your CISOs or your CIOs or CTOs. You know, are we running systems using AI? Your next thing you need to look at is shadow IT, where you have developers who are playing with AI and no one knows because it doesn't come up on the radar. Those are major questions because I always think about, you know, how do you ruin a great cake? You introduce an ingredient that no one knows is in the cake. And that's what I look at AI as, is that we talk about it as this new, great, fantastic thing, but how many companies are already running in the HR software and others AI, and your technical gurus within the company do not understand its true impact? And your developers are the ones you should really worry about, because one of the things that I've seen in a couple of the companies I've worked for, and also from a government standpoint, is to shadow IT, all of these things that are happening in the background that even the CISO doesn't isn't aware of, because you have different business units that are running software packages that will, and applications that will help them be more efficient in their business, and they're introducing AI into your corporate setting, no one knows. And I'm just fearful of what is going to be the legal ramifications. And when you talked about, Karen, when you talked about war and, you know, the threats from China and Iran and things like that, in authoritarian, excuse me, in authoritarian countries, if you're a criminal and you're brilliant at cyber, you have to assume that they're working for the government. And if you're in an authoritarian country and you're a criminal, you're going to work for the government. Because the government, you know, different than what we have in the United States, you're going to get one of those Godfather offers that you're going to work for us or you're going to disappear. So what do? You know, if you look in the past 10 years, how many of the individuals that the FBI has arrested or has indicted, they all work for the government in some shape or form. And that's what I'm worried about, because these are people who are developing these different AI packages that your developers within your companies are working with. So they don't even understand how deep the threat is and what they're introducing into their business units. And I think, I'm going to speak on behalf of CISO, the worst day in the world is to understand that you've gotten a vulnerability from an application package that you didn't even know was in your system. And your developer is the one that put it in your system. That's my fear.
Can I do a quick aside on that one? And then you've put it into your product and deployed it to thousands of customers. That's the really tough day.
Just to put a thing on that, what we're seeing across the board is companies are getting much better at protecting their own systems, right? But what you're talking about, Eric, Jessica, what you're talking about is that supply chain. And what we're seeing significant cyber incidences where it's really crippling companies now is the supply chain, right? I mentioned the MOVEit incident, SolarWinds, right? What we're seeing more and more is an attack somewhere along the supply chain, something you didn't even know, might have been 2, 3, 4 rows down, is completely impacting your business. And like the MOVEit incident is a great example because a lot of the banks didn't use MOVEit. It was third party of third parties that were using it to securely transfer files. And so what you're saying, Eric, about where AI shows up, I mean, have you thought through your supply chain vendor management programs and the questionnaires and how far down you're drilling down onto knowing what exactly is in those softwares, what AI is in there, what cyber protections are in there? And I think if you really ask most companies, they will say yes, but when you read their questionnaires, the answer is they really haven't gone down that level of detail because it's a lot to get into.
So I will start with some of good news, some good things. First is the concept that in most modern cyber insurance policies, if you are paying for a good policy and going ahead and paying that extra little bit to get some other things, there is going to be coverage for those dependent failures. So in those scenarios in which a service that you depend on, cyber or otherwise, that is essential to your business, and they have a cyber incident that then makes them unable to do whatever they do for you. So whether it's supply that product, do your payroll, whatever it might be. So a lot of cyber insurance policies now do have either dependent business interruption or dependent system failure. There's different terminology for it. So there actually is a way to transfer some of that risk, which is nice. The other positive thing in our industry, and I don't know, again, how often you interact with your insurance folks, but by and large, they look like people in this room mostly, as opposed to 25-year-olds. We are an aging industry, so there's not enough people to do what needs to be done in the insurance world in terms of underwriting and all of that. So AI is actually enabling insurance companies to do a better job of looking at your risk and assess more risks. actually brought a little thing here. It's interesting. Have you ever seen one of these scorecards that your cyber insurance carrier does? So there is one, so you should ask for it. And it looks at, literally looks at all of the software you're using. It's an external look. It is literally like a replicated threat actor going, oh, they use this software, they use that software, this port is open. So it's really interesting, and that's not a human doing that. That's all machine work. And they're actually assessing your risk more directly and more accurately by doing that. One last comment I'll say, and this kind of gets to a lot of the fact that cyber insurance policies are often cyber technology. Or you may have other errors and omissions or malpractice type policies depending on what you do for a living. After the lawyer incident with the brief that was filed that they used ChatGPT to file, a bunch of case law didn't even exist. The insurance companies are actually looking at, in errors and omissions policies, putting an exclusion in that says something to the effect of if whatever professional service you supplied was based on AI, as opposed to the professional services of the humans that you tried to sell, it won't cover it if there's a malpractice claim. So I definitely think we're going to see that in legal malpractice policies, architects, any of those licensed professions. I don't know at what point it will find its way into the technology errors and omissions side of a cyber policy, but it's something on the horizon possibly.
Well, that's a game changer because in a knowledge-based economy where basically AI is supposed to basically be embedded, to the extent that professional services are excluded who rely in part or in whole on AI and all that big definition, you can see the court cases playing out. So let me just, go ahead.
I just want to follow up, and here again is where my FBI radar goes off. When you have AI that is detailing all your applications, here are all of your things, potential vulnerabilities and stuff like that, and they end up on the internet. You know, because an employee decides to share that with someone outside of your organization, what have you just created? You've just given the bad guys a roadmap to your systems.
Yeah, literally, here's the open port. This is what it is.
Yeah, this is your open port. And I've literally seen that during my FBI days where the disgruntled employee sends their work product to their new employer to show that I'm this great person. And they post it on LinkedIn or anything like that. They've now just given a roadmap to their vulnerabilities. And that's what I worry about, that once we turn AI into showing us where our vulnerabilities are, bad guys are going to get that, and you're going to give them a roadmap. And here's the problem, and I've seen it in real time. You identify a vulnerability. How many people have the capability of fixing a vulnerability in a few days? It usually takes how long? Weeks to months to some years. And that means that you've now put a red flag on a vulnerability that you may not have the capability, or your third party may not have the capability of fixing. And that goes back to what we started this discussion with. Is that a risk acceptance, that you're going to accept that vulnerability? And if you're not, then from an insurance point, if it's already been identified that there was your vulnerability and it was your vulnerability and you didn't fix it in an adequate time period, and that's what caused the loss, how do you cover that?
Well, interestingly enough, a little anecdote about this particular report. So this company just got, you can't tell who it is, I marked it out, but this particular company got a 92 on this report. This report was run a week after they got a 37. And they score it like 100 is like 100, right? It's like a classroom grade is essentially what they're giving you. What was interesting about it is we started the insurance process, this scan gets run, and it's like, holy crap, what's happening? This company had a great score last year. Turned out somebody forgot to reauthorize their domain, and I don't even know, like, apparently you have to occasionally like pay for that again. And they had forgotten, which then meant all of a sudden they were now on the blacklist for every organization to interact with. They were actually able, they came to us as they're broken, they're like, what the heck do we do? Made a few calls, found them a vendor, and then the vendor essentially cleaned them up on the internet. They got their domain reactivated, vendor cleaned them up on the internet, so they went from having a 37 to a 92 in a week. And they would not have even known that that was an issue if the scan hadn't been run. And then they learned in the process of that, all sorts of critical people had been not getting things from them. In fact, I was in a conversation with this client about 2 or 3 days before we realized the issue. I was like, I still don't have your cyber application. And they said, oh, we sent it to you. I'm like, you might be in your outbox. You need to hit resend. And then all sorts of things they figured out they had sent all kinds of secure emails to all sorts of people that never received them because they've been blocked by everyone's spam filter. So to answer your question, depending on the vulnerability, sometimes you can fix it pretty quickly. But this whole insurance procurement process, I think, does help a lot of people identify what these risks are.
Just a little bit on the threat nature of the cyber criminals, right? We already know that they are using AI in cyber attacks. They've been using it significantly to reduce dwell time. So once they get into your system, one of the first things cyber criminals want to do is assess your system, right? They want to find the crown jewels. They don't really want to just take a bunch of data that has no meaning. They don't want to be spending a lot of time somewhere that doesn't have any value if they can use it as a launching pad to somewhere else. So there's this period of dwell time, and used to be a lengthy period. They'd be in your system trying to figure out what's valuable. That time has significantly shrunk and shrunk and shrunk, and now they can essentially do that with AI systems. They're using that dwell time down to days, if not hours. It used to be months. So they're in your system, they're moving quicker. On the flip side, our AV systems, right, we're using a lot more AI, behavioral pattern recognition, to assess when a user is doing something that's abnormal or outside the norm. So we are also using AI in AV systems to try to make sure that your systems people are operating the same way. But you're already seeing it in that cyber fight, cyber war almost, right? You're seeing AI becoming a major portion of that.
So one of the comments that I offer for us to consider is on this AI. Why AI? If, as professional directors, we can master deeper thinking about AI, it actually will pull us from all the other cyber risks that were perhaps left behind. Because AI requires us to really ask, what kind of risk are we talking about? Internal, external? What is AI? First start with, we threw out the word AI without even defining what AI is and how it applies to our particular company. So the reason I think AI needs to be even, not just a part of the conversation, but a particular part, is because it actually helps us elevate our intelligence to ask the right questions and validate the right answer. Because we are lassoing water in the early innings here, and as a result, that's what directors do. We're supposed to be asking questions. We may not know all the answers, but we can start asking, and as a result, that hones our skills for all the other cyber risk governance attention. The other thing is that the CTO has been kind of left out of the, it was unclear. The CISO really came of age in the last decade. And thank you, Jesser, for leading the way. And the general counsel got involved because the CISO said, oh, covered data? Oh, that's the general counsel's responsibility. And when this thing of AI that has a little bit of everything, the CTO says, what, I found my place in life, And so being able to really dig into AI and ask the right questions will help us be better in asking the right questions for all the other things. Let me also, a couple other things that I've been thinking deeply about with AI. Now, AI goes back a way to think about it. If you have think about transactional transactions. Their outcomes, transactional outcomes, there are good outcomes and bad outcomes. And if you have large enough data sets of good outcomes as well as bad outcomes, and then you have a large enough, I think it's into machine learning and some real wonky stuff that way over my head too, but it's really simple to think about. If you have a fact pattern that comes to you, you can map it to whether it's more likely to be a good outcome or a bad outcome with a high degree of statistical validity. That was the early innings of AI. Let's call it predictive analytics. We've been taking that on steroids, much more sophisticated with the coding and the data and all the kinds of things. Here's one of the fundamental problems with AI that's going to come up. In fact, I'll tell you about a Back to the Future moment in a moment. Think about AI. One of the things about AI is it has zero emotion. Now think about making personnel decisions or any other kind of decision using AI of decisions that probably should have an emotional aspect to it. Let's take the virtue of gratitude for a moment. Old-fashioned kind of gratitude. Go back to the future here for a moment. What impact should that be? When we talk about corporate culture, some of these things, like empathy and gratitude and some of these human emotions, we go, well, humans mess up things. Fair. Okay, fair statement. You can look at the world and see that. On the other hand, if we are trying to use AI to make decisions that inherently should be led by human intelligence, or at least less mine, then AI can be used as augmented intelligence, but to rely on it to make decisions that inherently require human empathy and gratitude and emotion, we're going to get off the tracks pretty quickly, when you can see. And imagine, if you will, let's walk forward 20 years, everybody's using AI. So basically, it's been the great equalizer. It's ubiquitous, all the data in the world, and there is no such thing as proprietary data anymore. The moment that you think it's proprietary, it's open, and it's in everybody's engine everywhere. You can imagine the company saying, oh, yeah, everybody else uses AI, but we use HI, human intelligence, as our differentiator. You can almost see this going where AI has become taking over the world, and people are going, let's go back to the future where we actually have a human that we're interacting with. So I would say that from my perspective, AI is one of the most fascinating things on the planet right now because of things I don't know about. Again, this journey in search of a destination. Okay, so I would like to give everybody an opportunity to give some closing thoughts, and then I want to open it up to Q&A, and then we'll take a break and we'll come back to the Caremark session. So, Karen, let's go this way. Main takeaways and things that you feel impressed to tell us about.
The main thing, and this is one of the things we talked about before, is I think cyber governance needs to be thought of as no different than any other risk that you face. And one of the challenges, I think, from a board level is this notion of it's new and we don't understand it and we don't know about it. But then what I would say is if you're on the board of a factory where you produce widgets, do you have to know how to actually run the machines and run the factory floor to be a good board member? No, you don't. And so I think this would be the same sort of thing. You've just got to learn how to ask the questions of materiality. So whether you are a public company or a private company, I still think the public company concept of materiality is what you need to be asking. But I did bring with me a document that I would encourage everyone to read. It is something that PwC put out in January last year, and it's called Overseeing Cyber Risks, the Board's Role. And it is just a really good basic guide of some questions you ought to be asking, and not just about the risk, but questions you want to be asking about the incident response plan.
Oh my gosh, you gave me the perfect segue. I love it. Okay, so I'm putting my CISO hat on. Let's talk about real quick plans in resiliency. I spend more time with any of my customers doing plans. A plan in place may be the difference between you going out of business and staying in business. Cyber incident response plan, business continuity plan, disaster recovery plan. Clorox is playing all of these plans out. The other thing, when we're talking about protecting our information and using like external scans and things like that, have the conversation of what you need to mark privileged and confidential. This is blood work for your company. And Eric's right, if it gets out, it's a roadmap on how to attack you. And in the cyber incident response war room, hopefully you do a tabletop exercise because you need to practice it before you're in the throes of it. But in that room, it is not the CISO making decisions. It's legal counsel. And they're always shocked during the tabletop, like me, yes, you call all the shots. You're the one that says, we're reaching out to FBI, external providers, it's time to call the cyber insurance. And even external counsel is who they work for. So just understand kind of how this inner workings work around cyber incident response, because a lot of boards still aren't talking about resiliency yet, so I just wanted to let that.
I will add one thing on that. With that planning, make sure that the insurance is part of that planning.
Oh, yeah.
I actually had a client who had that terrible situation happen on Christmas Day. And a few months later, after it was all resolved, that client said to me, the insurance kept us from what could have been a terrible company-ending event to being a $50,000 bad day. And that was their deductible. And it wasn't just that they had the transfer of the dollars, it was the process. They were a small company who couldn't do it all internally, so the ability to call the insurance carrier and flip a switch to have a process to get them back up and running. So include that in the planning.
Eric?
It's great that me and Jessica are sitting next to each other because everything she's saying, having your business continuity plan, incident management, how do you handle an incident and who runs your incident? And how do you flow through an incident through completion? And then testing your theories at the end of that. And doing your normal testing of your business continuity plan to make sure that you have a plan that actually works. Because there's no worse feeling than to have a binder full of documents to find out that they don't work. And if you don't test them, and you test them hoping that at the end of it, you find problems. Because if you have a business continuity plan and you test it and there are no problems, then you've been snookered. Because every business continuity plan should have a problem at the end. Now, here's for board members. I'm gonna, so you don't have to go through the FBI Academy for 21 weeks or have a 21-year career. I'm gonna give you a basic thing. Never ask a question that you don't know the answer to already. Take that through life, because if you already know the answer or you partially know the answer, then you're always going to ask a great question. And that's how you get to ask questions of your CISO, of other people who are engaged in your resiliency. One of the greatest questions that I asked at my last employer was, we have a crisis management issue that involves the insurance company. What's the name of our insurance company? Who's our contact? What's their phone number? How do we get them? What do they cover? And if this incident happens, how quickly can our general counsel activate that insurance policy? And I will tell you that the answer was no one knew. And that all came up in a crisis management testing. So sometimes just asking the right question from your knowledge base will help you understand where your vulnerabilities are. And that's, so if you do that and you have fun with it, just remember that you heard it from an FBI agent.
Yeah,
It's good when your number's in their phone.
right. Do not store your plans on your computer. It needs to be stored in multiple places. In the middle of a ransomware attack, you cannot get to your computer. The plan, it then turns into people running up and down the hall going, help, 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 help. So yeah, don't, again, lessons learned on that one.
I'm going to echo everything my fellow panelists said, which is be prepared, right? That's the number one thing that you need to take away as you develop and work on these cyber plans is you got to really prepare for the incidents. As Brad said, I have a background, I have a fairly unique background. Before I became a lawyer, I did computer science and physics, worked in the industry, and I did a year where I worked with the military. I did war games for the military. And we would plan out warfare scenarios, realistic, 5 years in advance, going through the scenario. And the critical part of that was to stress the system, right? You want to, if you really want to understand how a warfare is going to look in 10 years, 5 years from now, you can't just walk through and do it in a nice way. You got to really stress your systems. And that's the same when it comes to tabletops. Too often we do very general tabletops just to walk through the plan. You really should be thinking through how do you want to stress your systems in a tabletop. And there may be value of having separate tabletops for different groups. You know, your IT team may need to be doing a separate tabletop than the larger scale incident response team tabletop, where, you know, as Jessica mentioned, I do a lot of data breach cases, and it is shocking to clients how much I'm interjecting in those moments of, well, you shouldn't do this for these reasons, and you should do this for those reasons. It's necessary because it's a very complex legal issue once you have the incident. Now that the SEC cybersecurity rules, where you have to do a materiality assessment and potentially get a materiality, an 8K file in 4 days after making that materiality assessment, you know, we're talking about doing tabletops of just the materiality team, members of the incident response team, members of your securities team, but who's making that decision of what's material and when, and doing a tabletop of going over scenarios to identify that. And the same should be done even at the board level, right? Walking through what is going to happen in a real scenario, when the board's going to get notified, what questions are you going to be asking, who's making the decision on the ransomware payment, things of that nature. So I strongly emphasize being prepared is really critical as you go through this process. We've all, I think, have seen and heard experiences of companies that are not prepared, and that usually results in far more expensive costs, sometimes some of which the insurance company won't cover, oftentimes results in longer delays, and it is chaos in that beginning period if you don't know your incident response plan and you didn't go over it thorough enough before the event.
All right. So I probably saw Ro here. She probably slipped out. So we're going to just turn it over to our audience here to ask any questions of our panelists. And yes, sir.
Do we need a microphone? I'll try to
Yes,
talk
I'm
loud.
going to use one of the hot ones here.
Actually, microphone right there.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Walk up to the microphone.
All right.
Chris. Okay, so, can you hear me?
About now, does that work? Just to share with you a story, and I want to validate whether or not it was true, because, so my company, first of all, I'm a chairman and CEO of a public company, manufacturing. About 5 years ago, I think it was, we had a ransomware, very serious one. It was Saturday afternoon, because it always hit you on the weekend, right? It was Saturday afternoon, and I was watching TV. My CFO called me and said, we got a problem, here's what happened. My next phone call was to my insurance broker, who then got us in touch with Chubb, who was our insurance provider. And the success success story there is that's the best decision I made sitting in that chair. Because, two reasons. One was they understood, they even recognized what it was, because they have seen it over and over again. And they have dealt with it over and over again. So we put the team together. One of the things that, and I'll digress to tell you, in Katrina, when Katrina hit us, I was a volunteer in a lot of nonprofits, and what I learned out of that is, don't put us, this big stack of procedures together in the event you have a hurricane. What you do is you put the organizational structure in place to make the decisions quickly on the fly. So I recommend for board members, and I do this too, stay out of the decision matrix when you get hit to recover, but make sure you have the organizational structure in place to make the right decisions at the right time. So with that, we put the team together with the insurance company kind of helping us navigate through that. So my question is, that's a success story through my lens.
I apologize. We're having technical issues. I'm so sorry.
There you go. You never know what you say and who's going to hear it, right? So is this one working? And am I talking to?
I'm sorry,
Okay, so I just talk loud. How about I just do that? So at Katrina, we learned that it's really, really important that if you have an event, you can't prevent a hurricane, but when it comes, you put the organization, you have the organization in place, the decision matrix is in place of how you go about doing that. In a cyber attack, what I learned real time, and I unfortunately got lucky, I think maybe, but we had the structure of the organization in place that Chuck helped us put in place. Legal, even we did not get the FBI. They got the FBI engaged appropriately because they had done it many times. And the worst story you hear about is the CEO tries to negotiate with the bad guys, because that's the first thing they want you to do. Then as soon as you do that, they know, okay, I can double the price now. So one of the things I want to ask is the scenario that we all need to understand as board directors is what is the organizational structure we should latch onto when an event occurs. Two things: you got to prevent the event, the prevention of it. That's all about carbon back and all the software systems we have out there to work that and make sure the risk is mitigated. And then how do you respond in the event occurs? So I would just like to ask, is my success story still true? Get your insurance company to help gather the people around the room. I'm not saying you don't exclude the FBI or legal or anything like that, but is that still a good scenario?
I would say yes. Now, I would tell you, do not use your insurance company to tell you who that team should be. That should be part of your underlying planning. But absolutely, I've seen many circumstances in which that call to launch the process got all the vendors that you needed. But in terms of who you need at the table from a business perspective.
No,
yeah.
you're absolutely right. I didn't mean that. Yeah, you're right. The other thing is when you get the insurance company involved, you don't trip over something that all of a sudden you're not covered anymore.
That's right.
Because you can, the way it was explained to me in detail on my head, is that you can make a mistake after an event occurs that you no longer are covered had you not made that step. And so the insurance company, you got to understand that you don't do something that's going to, you're going to trip over, that's going to cause the tripwire to go off, the bomb to go off, and all of a sudden, you may have disrupted your coverage in your policy.
I agree with that. There are scenarios in which maybe you went to the wrong vendor, it was an unapproved council, it didn't start the meter running. There could be all sorts of issues with that. But I would share from that Christmas Day incident, it was interesting. Having the insurance folks involved at the very beginning helped make a lot of good decisions for that client. Because one of the things they had, and I will give you a little bit of information about them, is that they were a credit card processor. Not one of the ones you've ever heard of, little bitty organization, but a small public company, and their bread and butter was prepaid gift cards. So this occurred on Christmas Day. What happens on December 26th around 10 a.m. in the morning when North Park opens? And for them, if they had had a scenario that it didn't involve the business people also working with the insurance folks and saying, no, 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 I know best practice is to shut down the system. If these people shut down the system and don't honor those cards, their business is dead. So now we have to figure out a way to do this that fixes it, but also honors what the business has to do. So I thought it was really interesting having all the right business people at the table too mattered. So you didn't just have the CISO or somebody saying, no, shut this down. That's the best way to segregate this. But also that helped with the insurance company because their initial advice was, well, we have to segregate. And they had to explain, no, 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 we can't do that right now because then you're going to be paying our D&O claim too when the entire company fails.
Any other comments?
So, again, from my experience, right, that start internally. Having a solid cyber incident response team has all the players as part of that team. Your CISO, CIO, head of HR, head of PR, head of internal communications, legal counsel. You've got people that are going to get on a call or gather in a room, assessing really what we've got. The call from legal to the insurance company all happens very quickly. This isn't 1 hour and then another hour, another hour. But having everyone come to the table internally first is very important. And it's also important to understand, and Eric can probably talk about this too, it is illegal to communicate or to negotiate with foreign nation states. They have specific people who do the negotiations on your behalf if you are trying to negotiate the ransom. So don't ever feel like anyone at your company or your poor legal counsel who at that point is like, oh, it has to do that. So that's why we involve the FBI. And a lot of companies say, don't involve the FBI because they'll expose us, and they won't. That's not their job. So.
Yeah, I will tell you 100%. One of the things that you should do as a great company is get to meet your FBI counterparts wherever you're located. Their 56 field office, 356 resident agencies throughout the nation. The one thing that the FBI has, along with CISA and other members of the intelligence community, is they have reach overseas. So if you're being attacked, you want to give attribution of that attack while you're doing everything else. But if you don't bring the right players to the table quickly, what ends up happening is evidence is being lost, things are being taken away. There may be ransomware keys that have already been developed that can assist you that you don't know about because they're at a level that you may not know about. So I agree with everyone. Set up that team, but have, as part of your team, outreach to FBI, CISA, as the law enforcement components who will be there. And I guarantee you, the reason it happens on a Saturday morning is because the bad guys know when your network traffic is down or when it's at its peak performance. So they're already aware of that, so they know when they're going to attack. FBI works 24/7, 365. It's not you'll get a message that we can't be there. If there's a ransomware and you bring them in quickly, their work, and I did 5 ransomwares, and no one ever knew that the FBI was working with those companies from day one because we never talked.
All right. Well, I'm going to invite all the audience to ask questions during the break of our panelists. In the interest of time, I do want to introduce Caremark before our break, and then we'll start with Judge Strine's interview. We've been at for 2 hours. I know that's longer than normal. And we'll have a great closing session. I just want to say, isn't this a tremendous panel? Would you please just join me in Jessica, Carol, thank you so much. Outstanding advice. Well, panelists, cyber risk governance model. Part of that model is actually has templates that boards can start mapping governance questions that are relevant to their company. All the very things that Mark talked about in terms of being prepared. Caremark. Why do we call it Caremark? Well, as I was really on this journey to remake myself as a cyber governance expert, Caremark just came up over and over and over again as the legal standard for governance oversight over this championship defense, organizational resiliency. And so Caremark is just a abbreviated word from the Henry Caremark case. And then the series of cases, including some you know about, Boeing, Bluebell Ice Cream case was here. And as a result of these cases, a number of, when you go through the cases, particularly Judge Strine was very instrumental in helping me think through this, we saw a number of different things. Think about Caremark meets NIST Plus. One, starting with just a fundamental monitoring and reporting system to make informed decisions. Basically, duty of care. Fundamental duty of care. So duty of loyalty, duty of care. Duty of care is making informed decisions. You have to make fact-based decisions as best you can. Defining mission-critical risk. Is business interruption, this idea is business interruption. That would be mission-critical. But mission-critical could also be reputational. There may not be an immediate shutdown, but could have a material impact, your ability to attract and retain talent. And then a deeper understanding, again, going back over and over to this of a business and asking the question, what are the material risks to it? And being able to identify those. And then this came out of one of the cases in which the board did not really push back on management, and management was giving the wrong answers and weren't able to validate. Raises the bar for directors. And this came out of one of the cases in terms of oversight review, just reviewing reports by itself is insufficient when action is required. And then the whistleblower. This is going to come up again and again, probably in cyber risk, but it is pretty much part of best practices. And then the record of risk management decision making needs to be on the record and should be, that's part of the process. And then basically having deeper and better governance oversight. So those are the strategy principles. There's more, but those are the principal ones. And when we come back, we'll hear from Judge Strine, and then we'll introduce the SIQ cyber model, which will put the strategies together in a holistic way in a framework as we close out the morning. With that, we'll let us come back in exactly, let's do 10 minutes if we could. Okay? Thank you. 10:40. I am so pleased today to
I'm so I'm so pleased today to have Judge Lee.
was so gracious to prepare a deck that is part of the distribution deck. All the slides here today, including the cyber risk governance model, is available, and including Judge Strine's deck, and I would encourage everybody to look at that. Judge Strine, what a brilliant legal mind. And one thing that impressed me when I talked to him, if you look at his credentials, he's chancellor of the Court of Chancery, which is really a dominant corporate governance court in the Delaware Supreme Court. We could have spent time talking about all the legal cases and theories, but instead, really talked about companies and what value they are to society and the privilege of directors in corporate governance. And so I'd like to have you hear that in his own words.
I am so pleased today to have Judge Leo Strine to interview on the Caremark legal standard. As we talked at the beginning of the first hour, Judge Strine has a deck that will be included within the distribution deck, and I really encourage people to read that with our professional director audience. Judge Strine, it's hard to introduce somebody with the credentials of Judge Strine. You have the bio in the materials. He's a former Chief Justice of the Delaware Supreme Court. He was the Vice Chancellor and then the Chancellor of the Chancery Court. He teaches law at both the University of Pennsylvania and Harvard Law School, and he's written so many articles on corporate governance. Really one of the global thought leaders in corporate governance. Judge Strine, thank you again for joining us. I know our professional director audience is going to really have some great takeaways from this.
It's an honor to be with you, Brad, and to be part of this great program you put together about this important subject.
Thank you. But Judge Strine, in the Caremark standard, how should our professional directors think about Caremark and their responsibilities as professional directors?
Well, one of the things, Brad, there's a societal debate sometimes about whether companies can only seek profit, whether they consider the best interest of their stakeholders. And sometimes people say profits come first under corporate law. It's actually not the case. The bottom line in Delaware corporate law and in almost every state is that the companies are allowed to do lawful business by lawful means. So it's actually the bottom line of being chartered by society as a business is you can do legitimate business in the sense that your business has to be legal, right? Like you can sell something, but if society says you can't sell heroin, you can't be in the heroin business. And the means by which you do business also has to be legal. So you can't defraud people, can't lie to them about the products you're selling and try to make money that way. So when you think about part of why we have independent directors, right, is there's always the potential that somebody's motivation to make a profit might tempt them to, bend the rules, to seek advantage by unfair means. And part of why we have independent directors is it's been thought that sometimes because managers in companies are full-time, sometimes their pay is tied to profits, that we need a segment of the board that is responsible for overseeing management, that has independence, and that is going to make sure that the company makes money the right way. And that's why in this Caremark area, if one way to summarize it is that there's a duty on the part of the board to make sure the company makes money the right way. What I mean by that is that we're making money because we sell valuable products and services that make our customers better off. That in doing that, we honor the legal rights of our employees to a safe workplace, to minimum wages, to the right to join a union. That we don't pollute the streams and the air of the communities where we operate, that we pay our required taxes, and that our customers get products that are non-fraudulent, that are safe. and that we have a duty as a company, as I said, to do business by only lawful means and only lawful ends. And what the Caremark duty is that the independent directors, especially, but the board as a whole, are supposed to make a good faith effort to make sure that the company runs itself in a way that is compliant with the important laws that constrain it, and make sure that when it seeks profit, it doesn't harm anybody's fair expectations.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is that for professional directors, these independent directors that are stewards for the company, they need a deeper understanding of the company's business, but also the company's business model. Could you maybe talk about that? One's what they do, and two is how they do it, and how should the risk oversight play into that?
That's a great, and I always say, Brad, that the first question I think that an independent director has to ask before it can serve effectively as a member of the board is, how does this company make money? And I mean that in the most elemental sense, which is, where does the cash flow come from that generates profit? If it's from a product, what is that product? Where is it made? How are the people who make it treated? Are there environmental issues that come with it? What are the risks to the consumers who make it, right? And, you know, it can be complex to think about, but that is the most fundamental question. And when you ask those questions, using your big brains, and we'll talk about this again, but bringing to bear your judgment as an experienced business professional, when you ask those questions, that's when you tend to, you know, think deeply about how is it that the company is rubbing up against others when it operates in a way where it might hurt them. And, you know, interestingly, the term ESG, or I use, as you know, I use an extra E because I think employees are so important. But the term ESG, one way to think about it is, where does the company rub up against somebody, like the communities in which it operates, right? Are the communities better off because you have a plant there? Like, are they glad to have a plant there because it's a clean, attractive plant and it doesn't pollute and it provides good jobs? Or frankly, does it pollute the streams that people want to go fishing in with their kids and where they drink the water? You know, are the workers better off because they get a quality wage, an opportunity for a better life for the family, and they come home safe and feeling good about themselves? Are the consumers better? When you ask those questions, those are the questions that tend to be also relevant to legal compliance. Mm-hmm. Because if you think about it, right, Brad, where you rub up against stakeholders is typically where the law rubs up against the company, which is a company that has water emissions is likely to run into the EPA. A company that has, you know, let's say there are types of manufacturing that are more dangerous than others. Like if you make steel, that steel is going to be in molten form at some point, right? Mm-hmm. So probably there are OSHA issues that come with that, right? If you make pharmaceuticals or you make food products and they go into people's body, then the FDA is likely to take an interest in you. So a lot of times, your key stakeholder concerns will be symmetrical with your key legal concerns. But one of the things that we've often done is not think in a business-like way about that. And we've often put the Caremark sort of legal compliance duty over the one side and the thinking about it more like from a stakeholder point of view for another. And then we end up with thinking about the same issue in a disconnected, inefficient way. You might even, you know, I've seen companies where they put their environmental, like they have a sustainability report that's over in nominating corporate governance, and yet the audit committee does really the hard work of environmental compliance. I've seen many companies, there's no company, you and I talked about this, there's no company that doesn't have HR issues. But it's very common for companies to not really have a regular place at the board committee level or board room to talk about the issues that affect the workforce. And so I think what we're talking about here is how do you think about what are the principal ways in which this company affects other people?
Yeah.
How do we organize ourselves so that when we seek profit, we're doing it in the right way? And therefore, if we're making profit in the right way, we're more likely to produce sustainable value for our investors. We're likely to build credibility with our stakeholders, including our customers, and we're less likely to run into legal or ethical difficulties that actually get in the way of us concentrating on business and that cast doubt on our integrity.
So, as usual, when I talk to you, I have these light bulb moments, and as you were just talking, another one came. One, I think your construct of how too often boards keep legal and business separate, but not just integrating, as you said, but business being thought of specifically stakeholder class by stakeholder category. I think that's one light bulb moment. And the other that strikes me is so many times as a director, we'll get appointed to a board and we come in midstream to this company's business that's already in, and directors don't step back and say, let's start all over and ask ourselves the Caremark questions that we should be asking, at least annually. How does this company make money? Does it make money in the right way? And how does that map to stakeholders? Could you maybe just elaborate a little bit more? Do you see that as a failure that we don't ask enough Caremark questions in the midstream of a company's evolution?
I think that's right, and I think there's a natural thing. I mean, as the law clerk, as a judge, you would hire law clerks on an annual basis, right? And I remember, the law clerks from other judges, right, or these things, when you've, not taken the time to, look someone in the eye, shake their hand, learn their name, after about 6 months for the rest of their clerkship, if they're for another judge, they're like, hey, you're like, hey, how are you? I think that directors, because they tend to be accomplished people, they feel uncomfortable about asking what they see as stupid questions.
Yeah.
There is such a thing as a stupid question. It's a question you haven't tried reasonably to answer for yourself. But when you come in as a director, you should read deeply, but you should ask hard questions. I think you're going to find, if you do, that many midstream directors are saying, I wish I had asked that question, or I'm so glad that Brad came in and actually did that. And the real danger, it's a real danger when the board is asleep at the switch. Because there are so many, management, if management can't answer your question in a clear way, that's a failure of management. They ought to be sharp, and you're helping management by saying, why are we doing this? Or why are we doing an environmental sustainability report in non-Canadian corporate governance, but we have the legal compliance and audit? Is the audit committee really meet with the hardworking people who do the environmental compliance? If so, why not? And why are we doing things twice rather than once? Because, here's the other thing about human nature, right? There are all kinds of people. Anybody who's had adolescent children know that you'll get more aretha or respect if there's a 3-letter word that you keep in mind, W-H-Y. Oftentimes people may not agree with you, but if you show them the respect of explaining why, they often will take it better. And frankly, when people understand a good reason why and they agree with it, it motivates them behind what they're doing. But then there's a recalcitrant group of society who says, the only thing I'll do is what's actually required. Well, that's why law and values infuse each other. Because for most people, actually knowing the why, saying, oh, this is why we're doing this. This is why our community that we operate in is going to be better off if we, do this and take the time to do it, and we feel better about ourselves. And then there are people who say, well, frankly, if you don't do this, you'll get in trouble, and it's not okay. And so it's also bringing things together is the best way. And it's also, what I've heard from people is it's difficult to address all the issues you have to do. Okay, if it's difficult to address all the issues that you have to do, then it's much more important to think about how you do them in a business-like way, And I think, you know, I've had the honor of talking to independent directors for a long time now. I think one of the things, Brad, that we failed in corporate governance for the longest time is thinking about the time of the board in a business-like way and making sure that the board is spending its time in the highest priority areas. And if you think there's too much to do, then one of the most important things is avoiding doing things in a sloppy and ineffective and duplicative way. You want to do them once and well, and therefore optimize the use of everybody's scarce time.
The judge, thank you for that. Could you, as we go through the home stretch here, could you maybe talk about Caremark standard and how you would think about it, applying it to cyber risk governance, particularly an expanded set of cyber risks that not just includes cybersecurity, but also data privacy, the way we use covered data, even emerging technology like artificial intelligence is really the du jour risk today, and cyber insurance, if you have any thoughts on that. But just cyber risk in Caremark.
Well, and I'll relate it back to thinking about how does our company make money, right? When you ask that question,
Yes.
it's got to involve, for example, healthcare. If I'm in healthcare, I'm gathering, I could be, if I'm a health insurer, am I gathering, for example, the prescription history of all my clients? Am I gathering things where just the record of their treatment by their physicians could reveal to somebody, you know, their psychiatric or other sorts of history? If that is the case, and we know that HIPAA applies, then obviously that's got to be addressed. But there's other businesses, which is, do we just sell basic consumer goods? But when we collect information from Brad and Leo, do we actually resell it to others? And do our customers really know that? Or do they just get that 3 pages where to do business with us, they check some box? And does the board know that we're actually, it's not a big part of our business, but we profit off of doing this? And when we send that information to others for profit, do we know anything about their cybersecurity? And what I'm saying is, I think every industry has different expectations. I had the honor of representing a defense contractor recently. That is very important to our national defense, but frankly, they make products that's been important to the people of Ukraine. Well, you know, they have obviously cyber concerns that go to national security.
Yeah.
And so understanding how you use other people's information and organizing your compliance function around an informed judgment of where the misuse of that information, the leak of that information could most harm somebody. That's obviously, you know, and when you think about it in human terms, like how could we really hurt somebody? It almost always tracks the legal risk too. Because, you know, the law is, for all its faults, it generally makes sense. And it generally does get tighter, like health information is tightly regulated because it is so sensitive and personal. Financial information, right? If you're in the financial industry and you're collecting information that could compromise, you know, somebody's credit rating or their economics, then obviously protecting that becomes, you know, an important kind of consideration. And also, are we collecting information even from our employees, right? Why are we collecting it? Like, asking questions about, like, one of the best ways to not leak sensitive information is to not collect it unless it is actually definitely needed by you to do, as a business, right? Are we collecting information from our customers just because it was on some form 15 years ago? When we don't even use it anymore. I mean, when I was a judge, we went into electronic calendaring, and I had the staff had been told to write down in 3 calendar books the schedule. And I came in as chancellor, and I'm like, and again, it's not the board, the management should be doing it, but the board asking these questions and then organizing its committee structure in a way that does this, because I'm not wed to cyber being at any particular place in any company. I think when you're more cyber forward, it's more likely that whatever, I believe, Brad, as you know, and you'll see this in the deck, folks, that for most companies, you ought to have a central committee, a committee that deals with your central business line.
Yeah.
And to the extent that cyber is really at the forefront of that, then it probably should be dealt with there. In other companies, you can imagine having audit have as its key remit financial legal compliance risk and cyber, the central business line dealing, if you're a pharma company, dealing with pharmaceutical risk, and then I think, for those of you on boards know, comp committees spend all their time on the top 12 people at the company.
Yeah.
Expanding their remit, Brad, to cover, basically be a workforce committee, so that you have HR covered by a committee, and that there's a regular chance. I think, one, that's really important, and if you're gonna have the people who do it have a difficult time, the people who do HR companies have a difficult time getting on the agenda of the audit committee because the audit committee has so much to do, you would have a regular opportunity for them to do it, but you'd also then do a better job on executive compensation because you'd be considering top executive compensation within the context of knowing how you treat the entire workforce, and you're also then spreading the work of the board in a more efficient way. And we should, I'll stop talking, but one of the things we should think about too is who's in the boardroom and how do you spread that expertise? And for example, many companies, someone who's a pharmaceutical expert might not feel comfortable being on their compliance committee even though they're a food or pharma company. Why, Brad? Because they might have put all the compliance in audit.
Yeah.
And someone who's an FDA expert doesn't feel comfortable as a financial expert. But we have no problem having a former CFO or accountant deal with serious issues of pharmaceutical risk. If you organize yourself as a board in a way that makes sense in terms of what your company does and what industries it's in, then you can have someone who, you can have a pure industry committee if you're a pharma or a food company that has people who really have industry-specific expertise that's critical to making sure you comply with the, very important rules that apply in those sensitive areas. And then you can have a strong group of people with a finance and cyber background who are on audit. And then same thing with the human resources to make sure you have people on the board who understand that function and who can help the hardworking managers who deal with that issue. That is the business-like way of thinking about it and looking around the boardroom and saying, what are the challenges we face as a company? Do we bring to bear as a board the relevant range of expertise? And are we organizing ourselves to take best advantage of our expertise?
Judge, brilliant insights, and I'm going to encourage everybody to look at the distribution materials and review Judge Strine's excellent deck here. Judge, we'll all send our very best to you, and thank you for spending time, and it's been great here, Doug.
Brad, it's an honor, and I applaud all the folks who are attending this. Is the effort that you're making to think about these difficult issues is a testimony to your commitment, and I just underscore that you all have abilities and talents, and just bring them to bear collectively, and I think that kind of good faith effort will serve your companies and you well. And it's also at the end of our lives, we all want to be able to look ourselves in the mirror and feel like we did our best, and by seeking to learn about your duties, you're exemplifying that kind of attitude. And so it's an honor to have been with you, Brad, and with your audience. Thank you.
Incredible words of wisdom.
Okay, so one of the things that came out of that for me was I come back to our presentation. Every company is different, size, maturity, so many different things. And so there isn't a one-size-fits-all. I hope that one of the takeaways is that we're really talking about the principles. That the principles apply regardless of of the, okay. That the principles that we've introduced here apply to whether you're a smaller company or a larger company, private company, public company. The most important thing is not that it's a perfect thing. Even the cyber risk governance model, we're not presenting it to be the best for everybody. It's not perfect. It's a journey in search of a destination. But what I hope the takeaway for the next section is that it's a framework for thinking about cyber risk governance in a deeper way, a way to meet where the board's governance oversight meets the management's enterprise risk management. We use these words interchangeably, particularly enterprise risk management, to believe both at the board level and at the management level. And I think it's important to have some clear definitions. That's something that you'll hear as we go through. So how should we think about it? Here's one way, not the only way, but at least one way to think about a cyber risk governance model. You can call it a framework. And by the way, if there are pieces of this model that need to be adapted for your company, by all means do. So when we think about this, let's start with a best-in-class company has those three championship defense, championship offense, and a championship intangible, this idea of trust. And the board of management are agreed on the governance model that is going to encompass and highlight these three competencies. The management teams really understand how to have enterprise risk management. They have an intelligence that is best in class, and for multiple types of cyber risk. So it's multidimensional. And then the board understand how to develop a comprehensive, measurable, you'll hear this word again, measurable, actionable cyber risk governance oversight plan that is mapped to organizational resiliency. So when we take the cyber model, we really use the three pyramid structure. Three show up in nature, periods of patterns of three. They come over and over again. And why pyramids? Well, the Great Pyramid of Giza. Anybody been there? You know, it was the tallest man-made structure for, over, 3.5 millennia. And so we start with a pyramid that aligns the foundational components. Before we get over to enterprise risk management or even governance oversight, we better agree on what the foundation is. Then we have a pyramid that aligns all the effective enterprise risk management for cyber risk. And then when you think about it, on top of this really is where the board's oversight should play. This is what we're going to build. We're going to build this in the next couple of minutes. This is what we'll end up with at the end of the day. There's a three pyramid, 9 steps. And let's start with the first step. Our first step is really mapping organizational resiliency, enterprise risk management, and cyber risk management, the alignment. Before we get, this is a mistake that we see, and we even see it with cyber security, which is, when we think about cyber risk, we're going to jump to cybersecurity technology and then get completely zeroed in on technology instead of mapping back, not just the enterprise risk management, but the organizational resiliency. That is a mistake we see over and over again. And it happens in almost any kind of risk management. It happens with human capital management. It happens when we jump to the technical aspect before mapping back step by step by step. So let's think about this. Best-in-class company, here's those three. So how should we think about organizational resiliency? We should really think about it, what do you want the outcomes to be? What are the outcomes? We want an organizational and resilient. So what does that mean? Well, there's business model resiliency. Human capital, really, talent is the thing, and strategic. This competitive, being able to withstand business cycles, cyber, all the kinds of things that we see, that the headwinds. Enterprise risk management. There's financial, there's operational, strategic. Strategic obsolescence. I would dare say that boards spend less time really understanding how their companies are being disintermediated right before their eyes. Strategic obsolescence. We're seeing that over and over and over again in a risk-on decade. I have a thesis that COVID basically accelerated a number of changes that were in place in 2020. Clearly, the decade prior to 2020, the teens, and recovering out of the Great Recession, and now are materially different. There are material changes, some of which are still playing out today. For sure, we have a different interest rate environment, but even geopolitically, socially, a number of changes that are part of, that should be part of our governance agenda. Cyber risk management, well, we talked about the NIST Plus. In NIST Plus, there are other frameworks that would be equally well. NIST Plus allows you to ask the right questions, or at least dig down into what does govern mean, or what does identify mean. And then when we talk about the execution, we really talk about 4 primary plans. Now, there'd be other plans, depending upon what you define as cyber, but at least these 4, I think, need to be addressed within a company to be best in class. This is a foundation as a start. So making sure we understand how cyber risk management, its plans, the execution plans, map back to organizational resiliency is the first step. Okay. And if you see, execution is really designed to what is the outcome. Over and over again, we need to ask ourselves in the boardroom, what is the outcome we want to have? Is it measurable? Is it comprehensive? Is it actionable? Step 2, board and governance leader alignment. Not only does our company need to be aligned, but the governance leaders. I'll use governance leaders operationally with the management team because really it is operational governance. And we'll distinguish that in just a moment. So one of the ways to think about it is the board, the C-suite, and then, the managers. And the board supported in its by internal audit. Again, not all companies have internal audit. So this, again, take away the principles here. But one way to think about it is the board is really the corporate governance leader responsible for organizational resiliency. Technically, governance oversight of enterprise risk management. The C-suite, operational governance leaders. What other role can we describe to them in their role as governance leaders internally? It's, I think, very appropriate to refer to them as operational governance leaders because they, every day, and in fact, most of the people here as directors came through as operational governance leaders and became better corporate governance leaders because of the operational governance leader principles that we perfected. Again, strategy and the development and implementation of strategy, and then we have the operational leaders there. Again, top-down self-government. At the end of the day, from a corporate governance standpoint, boards are inherently self-governing. They should be. And the best-in-class companies, absolutely. I mean, if you look at championship sports teams, they're self-governing at the player level, absolutely, with team captains. And that self-governance, that really unlocks the championship culture. Well, the older I get, the more simple that things become, starting with a common vocabulary. I can't tell you how many board meetings and work I do with companies that basically talk right past one another in the boardroom and with management. We take for granted, because we don't want to appear, we don't know, we're stupid. We don't want to appear like don't measure up. So we don't want to say, well, what do you mean by when you use that word? Governance is a word. Enterprise risk management, artificial intelligence. One of the first things, and I'm with a company right now that's in a turnaround, and it's private equity owned portfolio company in the direct selling business, and I'm on the special committee that's helping this company navigate its choices. And as I went back and dissected it, I've only been on the board about a year, and so I was the least conflicted director we put on the special committee. And as I went back and looked at what this company, it had gone out to market. It's about a $500 million business 18 months ago, and now it's about $300 million. And I said, where is that company that was profiled in the Deutsche Bank offering memorandum? What happened to that company? And I started to dig deeper and deeper and deeper, and I started to interview a number of different people, and I interviewed the private equity guys and the management team, and there was conflict as there was. It was like, they don't even use the same terms. They don't even use the same terms. They don't even know what they mean. And when the PE guys would use terms in a more of a financial centric, it was flying right by the management team. And when they threw out words like opportunity or direct selling, PE guys, you know, and I've seen this over and over again. Well, here's just one way. If I were start, I would have a vocabulary. Again, this is mainly cybersecurity, but you would add data privacy, artificial intelligence, even insurance. So we know exactly what all the buzzwords that Kara's familiar with. Those are words that need to be understood by directors. Let's talk about this 0 day, zero trust. This is all part of alignment, making sure we understand 0 day. Really, these are known unknowns, because it's only a matter of time before the unknown vulnerability is going to emerge, and it's probably already there. It was certainly, ask the federal government. Again, the embedded, now again, as Chardell said, what do you call it, how long, you used a term for how long the vulnerability, the threat is embedded. Dwell time, yeah. The dwell time is, yeah, excellent, dwell time. I learned something, I hadn't, dwell time. And zero trust really is that extra. It does bring friction. There's no question about it. There is a friction both internally and with our customers. But in cyber, sometimes we're doing what's the least bad choices that we have to make for organizational resiliency. Again, there's this trade-off. Do you take the chances and roll the dice and then have a business disruption that is cataclysmic, or do you at least put in reasonable procedures at the end of the day? And one way to think about this is top-down meets bottom-up to create a 0 day, zero trust corporate culture. Basically, risk awareness, really risk awareness. That starts with the board. Aware of risk, understanding what is risk, asking good questions. Step 3, a company cyber risk profile. How many companies actually have taken the time to actually look at risk? This is just an example. Mainly cybersecurity, but you should add the data privacy and artificial intelligence and cyber insurance inadequacy. And map the risk. Not every risk is mission critical, and nor should we be afraid of our own shadows. But we should go to look at the industry. And why this is important is under the recent Infrastructure Act, the responsibilities for enhancing cyber risk hardening is now being pushed to companies if they are part of critical infrastructure. And virtually any company that is healthcare, finance, any critical component supply chain, or those who are suppliers to them. I mean, effectively, you can see where this movement is going, where the public-private conversation is going to raise the bar for private enterprise, and then being able to map what the specific vulnerabilities are, both by company and by industry. Each company will be different. So let's talk about enterprise risk management, the management pyramid. What would be kind of the enterprise risk management mission? Well, one way to define this is a mission to serve the customer, the company. That truly is management's primary customer. A mission is best stated, in my opinion, as a mission to serve a core customer. In this case, by, identifying, assessing, monitoring, responding, and mitigating mission-critical risk, including cyber risk. So we start with that thinking first. Before we go to jump to cyber risk, it was said by one of our excellent panelists that cyber risk is but one of the risks. Kara, I think you may have mentioned that. And so asking the questions, so measurable, do we really have real-time alerts and metrics to determine whether or not our ERM, management's ERM, is effective or not? We fundamentally have the metrics on the table, and we determine which metrics will actually validate effectiveness. We have to define what effectiveness is. Is it the number of incidences, the frequency, the severity? This is where companies and boards need to come together to have this common vocabulary and a common worldview of cyber risk. Also the response and recovery speed. Again, you can think about the ERM questions that the board would be asking. Do we have these metrics? Is our effectiveness metrics about response time or recovery or identification? What does that mean here at this company? Comprehensive. Have we looked? Before we can get to cyber risk, just risk generally. We focus on the financial risk, and that was Judge Strine's point that audit committee has traditionally been, particularly since Sarbanes-Oxley, primarily focused on financial, but over time that scope has included near financial metrics. Audit is kind of a default for cyber in many companies, but given the scope, can really audit effectively focus on cyber risk in a comprehensive way that includes more than just financial risk, including reputational, strategic market, this idea of obsolescence, and then legal compliance. You might have other risk categories that you would consider some of these embedded in each other, but we're asking the right questions here. And then actual, the governance capital. You really have enough governance capital at the enterprise risk management level. The right ERM talent, the resources. And talent also would be not just individual talent, but the organizational ERM structure and the committees. Best practice would suggest that the board committees be mapped to operational governance committees. That whatever your committee structure is, if it's the standard, and we'll even add a risk committee to the audit, NomGov, and COM. Where are the equivalent, even if they're called by different things, at the management level? Again, larger companies will be more complex than smaller companies where it has to be adapted, but at least this governance oversight should be mapped so the same subject matter is being included. All right, step 5. So we talked about this. We talked about the strategy. Again, ERM strategy applies regardless whether it's to cyber risk or human capital risk or strategic obsolescence risk. The NIST Plus really applies. Yes, some of those risks are not. Now we're going to go over to the board pyramid. Instead of jumping to the board pyramid, and this is where boards make mistakes all the time, is we want to jump to the hot issue of cyber, so we'll go, well, how we're going to, oversight, before stepping back and going through the foundation and the fundamentals. That is one of the takeaways from here today, which is this fundamental construct applies to wherever risk, and it applies equally, by the way, if you're talking about competitive advantage or even stakeholder relationship trust. There's a foundation pyramid, there's a management pyramid, and there's a board pyramid. It's really the same construct that applies. Goes to the heart of what governance capital is all about. Well, in the board, we don't just have a governance mission, we have a governance oversight mission. We one way to think about that governance oversight mission is it's really a mission to serve all stakeholders. I think Judge Strine really brought this out in his construct of EESG. He has employees because he highlights them in addition to the standard E and the S and the G. And really, if you think about it, in the governance oversight, even more so than in stakeholder relationship, trust, and competitive advantage, you could make the same argument that applies, but for sure, governance oversight of organizational resiliency is the classic definition of both, in fact, having a company that's organizationally resilient in all of its dimensions and complies, both doing lawful business and doing it in lawful ways. We say it in different terms. Again, one of the reasons of coming to a common vocabulary is at this company, when we use this word, we mean this. Please, if I could have one takeaway, it would be that. If you don't remember anything else here, is start with a common vocabulary. Their governance drift occurs when there is not a common vocabulary. I want to repeat that again. Governance drift occurs when there is not a common vocabulary in the company. And so, well, same thing. What are the effectiveness metrics? Both in fact organizational resiliency metrics and legal and compliance metrics. There are a number of platforms and different things that you can use and many good software packages and things to track this. But again, understanding what the legal and regulatory compliance oversight metrics are is critical. That's why enterprise risk management needs to be distinguished from governance oversight. Otherwise, they get confused and you'll be, somebody, been in a boardroom where somebody was talking about something really from a point of view of governance oversight, but another director was talking about it as if they were at the management level at enterprise risk management, and the twain never met. And they came back to the next board meeting and went, so we've seen that. Again, oversight of the same missions, and again, when we talk about this governance oversight, again, this is important. We're really talking about at the oversight professionals. This includes third-party professionals. So you can see where if you jump to governance, you'll immediately start to go to enterprise risk management and bypass, well, do we even have the right governance oversight professionals, like a cyber expert, cyber governance expert to be correct? And do we have sufficient governance oversight resources? This will bring in the third parties that most large companies today. Yes, it is an additional cost, absolutely. The cost of doing business in a connected world has definitely gone up by the very nature of being connected. It is both the good and the not so good that we see. And then a performance culture. And this really is at the heart of a board and a performance culture of, do board members continue to strive to get better over and over again? I've often thought that at the beginning of a new year, every board member should stand up and say, this is what I'm going to work on this year. When I have taken a look at myself, there's been board assessments and everything. I've never seen a board yet where it had a roundtable discussion where board members said, I feel pretty competent here, I don't feel competent here, but this is what I'm going to do this year to get better and smarter and more intelligent in this, and then be able to, at the end of the year, report back as to how did they do in their own personal execution plan. Again, self-governing. Championship teams are built from the ground up with self-governance. You cannot have governance capital without having self-governance. Step 8, Caremark Governance Oversight Strategy. Well, these come out of the line of Caremark cases. Best practices would include all of these things that we've talked about. I dare say we do owe a debt of gratitude to Delaware. Why Delaware? Well, there's a big backstory, that's very interesting. And if you even start there, you start with the three primary governance systems around the world. The U.S. has its shareholder-centric that's trying to make this shift. But the European model, principally led by Germany, has a management board in addition to an executive board. And the Japanese have a different kind of structure. I mean, you start with corporate governance. Again, going back to the fundamentals, it's good to understand what's the similarities and differences within systems out there and why one, you don't have to say, well, one is just better to another because, it's the USA. You should say, fundamentally, what can we learn from all the good things that people have done? How do we incorporate those principles? Okay. But now we get to the last step, the board Caremark oversight plan. Here are some of the things that you would consider to be part of a board Caremark oversight plan that would exceed the Caremark plan. We don't want to just meet it. We want to exceed it. Championship teams exceed performance expectations. So basically, what's the committee and governance expertise? It does not necessarily have to be a CISO necessarily, but there should be somebody that can lead the board Caremark plan. There really should be somebody who says, I'm going to take responsibility for being the cyber governance expert. Could be more than one, and probably should be. It could be the CISO or a general counsel. That's less important than actually understanding what the governance expertise should be. Absolutely, information reporting system. It's the hallmark of Caremark, which you start there. That was the Bluebell ice cream case all over again, where there wasn't even, the board had not required to be put in, a fundamental reporting system that they would know that Listeria was leaking into their production. That changed the corporate governance world. That was an earth-shattering legal case because it raised the bar for directors, public companies, but the same principles apply to private companies. But that case raised the bar for fundamentally, do we have even a good faith? Doesn't have to be perfect. It may continue to be, improved, but do we even have a system that we can have the right information? There should be ERM effectiveness interviews. I'd say quarterly is a good construct, where you look at ERM effectiveness, not just in cyber, but with other mission-critical risks. The plans that are developed, how effective are they? Again, going back to those metrics. And digging into, do we really have the right talent? Do we have sufficient resources? Do we have accountable processes? And do we have a performance culture that's designed to create outcomes? What is the outcome that we want to achieve? Tabletop exercise, you've heard a lot about that. Eric talked about them. And both technology and non-technology, particularly the reputational risk. What happens? We can go all the way back, to the aspirin case. That was the famous case, in the Tylenol. And I think understanding what the risk exercises are and what the board, Mark talked about, the board having the systems in place and a procedure in place, but not getting involved. That's easier said when you do have all the right things as a predicate and everybody knows what to do. Otherwise, it will be a mad dash in most of these cases because hours, these are not weeks, but these are hours that are counting. Measurable. Gosh, board plus management assessments plus a third party, and I'm going to introduce this in just a moment in more detail, but measurable governance. This is part of that governance shift from tactical to strategic. Strategic not only is board and management co-governance, it's measurable governance. How do we measure? It may not be a perfect measurement system, but it's a way to address where we're going directionally. Internal audit. Again, not everybody has internal audit, and The internal audit sometimes gets pushed off to the side. And clearly, an audit plan can be very essential to board governance oversight for any company of any size and materiality. And then the use of third-party experts. This is hard because we talked about the array of risks. Well, there's technology risk that CISOs, they're very complex, technical, and it's evolving quicker than ever with edge computing, cloud computing, and yet to be determined. And think about when we're getting to quantum computing. We haven't got to quantum, and we're on the doorstep. Quantum's here in 5 years, for sure. I mean, we don't have time to digest artificial intelligence before we're going to get to quantum computing, and it's going to change the paradigm. So the legal experts, technology experts, insurance experts, yes, there's ways to cost effectively do that. Smaller companies can't afford what larger companies can. Again, that's going to be some trade-offs that are going to have to be made. And then continuous board cyber governance intelligence. Expanded and deeper understanding of this idea of what cyber risks are, and then governance itself. Just a deeper and expanded understanding. And this plan should really encompass oversight with each of those four and should be comprehensive, measurable, actionable. Well, so there we have it. Pretty much an abstract kind of plan. It's a dynamic plan. If you to do this, you'd need to keep it updated. But let's make it measurable, if we will. Well, one way to make it measurable, not the only way, but one way, is to basically take the construct and map it to those three pyramids, and then ask the question and have it scored by both the board independently and management independently so that we can determine whether the board and the management are on the same page of answering the same question. Now, in each of these categories, there will be three questions that map to things, but I'm just going to do an example. Here's an example of, asking that question. Now, as a baseline, this would establish a baseline of how far apart board and management is, or they even have some of these things. There's a fundamental question. Again, in each of these categories, there's three to make up the 45 points. And in the management pyramid, and you can add your own questions. Point is maybe this particular question may or may not fit best in your company. You may have a different one. Fundamentally mapping it to mission, strategy, and execution with a foundation, absolutely asking those questions and then being assessed. It's not enough just to ask the question in an abstract and get a single answer. It's really the thoughtful exercise of directors asking themselves and each other and management doing the same thing. I mean, we are used to a top-down hierarchical command and control corporate governance structure. And as a result, it's like foreign that we would receive the equivalent of what we see in the HR arena, 360 reports of management assessing board governance oversight. How many companies actually do that? They allow the management team to assess the board. I mean, it's like, no. But really and truly, how do we get better if we're not holding up the mirror to ourselves? And then the board. Is it clear? That we have this governance clarity of the questions, the terminology, and the construct. If this isn't the right construct, what is the right construct? And so we could create a score. And if you think about enterprise risk management metrics, that middle category right there of how the board and management are scoring each other by themselves is a good fundamental ERM metric. Is it perfect? No, because we need one more thing, is third-party experts. Now, whether you do the third-party experts, at least having board and management internally assess themselves is a good start. But when you add the third-party experts into this, you're not only asking about the ERM plans themselves, but the governance oversight over the ERM plans. and having professionals come in and assess both the cyber risk management plans and the governance oversight of the plans and answering these questions. Now you can see where we have directionally, we're able to have the scores, at least a metric. Is it perfect? No, because you can give yourself high scores at the end of the performance period. And we'll get to that in a minute on the implementation. That will tell us whether or not we were as good as we thought we were. But every championship team, does this same thing. They bring in outside experts. They watch. When I played in the NFL, I spent more time watching film of myself than I did of the other players. Being self-critical, absolutely part of and it's the heart and soul of what governance capital is all about. So where would the correlations be? Well, again, part of this work comes out of the governance capital model. We can take the third-party score and multiply it by the board and the management score. You could call this the FICO score of cyber risk governance. And one way to think about this is not the cyber risk governance grade is similar to what we see in the financial world with banks receiving a CRA rating, Community Reinvestment Act rating, many of you are familiar with. But there's an applied Caremark governance correlation and a cyber insurance correlation. May not be perfect, Kara, but it's a start to think about where are we at? How do we determine where we're at? Now, starting out, you could be better off than you think you are simply because board and management don't know. You haven't done through the assessments. Doing that assessment kind of puts a grounding so you can then determine how well. And that'd be one way to think about that. And best-in-class companies, will seek to achieve scores over 720. Well, but we have to implement this. One way to think about the implementation is there's both the board by itself, management by itself, and board and management together. Typically, there'd be about a 1-month governance model pre-build, doing the fundamental assessments, ground floor assessments, and then being able to do this. And so again, this is all put into the deck for the interest of time, my good friend. Okay, all right, so we're going to wrap this up. So, again, this is in the deck, and this is a way to think about it. Well, for governance intelligence, let me go back to this one real quick. Being able to see what is not in the picture, it's really an art to look at things and go, what's not there? Just driving down the road and go, what if, the world we live in is what we see every day. We don't stop and ask, what could be different, or what is not in the picture that should be in the picture? Okay. Well, our UTD program has 4 components. We have a board presentation that can be given. There's no cost for that to provide a board presentation. That's similar to the SIQ cyber model that includes the key governance. Congratulations, this is the very first session of the cyber governance strategy session of basically introducing NIST Plus meets Caremark governance oversight. And then we have 2 workshops. The workshop dates will be announced shortly. One is what every board member should know about cyber risk governance, but we do something different, which is we have a hypothetical case that has a range of cyber risk issues, and we ask the participants to architect a governance model using the 3-pyramid, 9 structs to that hypothetical company. So it's a post-workshop exercise, and we have templates, and they'll be automated and everything. And then for those who want to, once receiving that foundational governance certificate, then those who want to go further and be designated, we dive deep into the Caremark plan in an actionable Caremark plan and a very actionable against a specific company. So with that, I'd say my friend Don Springer, who's not here but is with us, thank you, Don, for all your work. And I want to say thank you to everybody that's here and for all the participants, and most importantly for you and for Greg Blue and the IECG. Thank you.
Good.